That feels like a punishment. So where do we draw these lines? Some very, very strange messages, direct threats to life. Really, at what point should this be criminalized? I've been involved in cases of international kidnapping, honor killings, or where someone has ended up in hospital beaten to within an inch of her life. Beyond any shred of doubt, we've reached a point where things need to change. With Lucy Connelly being released from prison, telling her story, her direct experience of this justice system, such as it is, and the laws such as they are, tells a very sad picture of what it is really like going through the process and being at the behest of the laws as they are, the advice as it is, the system as it is, and ultimately there is a question mark over whether there was any political persuasion by Keir Starmer with his speech that he said people will be arrested, they will be held on remand, there will be prosecutions, there will be convictions, and people will go to prison. Now, if you haven't watched it, Dan Wootton's exclusive interview with Lucy Connelly, she tells the story about how she was treated, what advice she was given, and how it ultimately ended up with her being in prison, to her great surprise for what she felt was not something so serious. Now, before we go any further, we're on my Off the Record channel. Thank you all so much for 85, almost 86,000 subscribers in such a short period of time. I am humbled, I am grateful, and it is my pleasure and my honor to be here to be able to talk to you about my genuine views about the legal system, legal advice, the legislation, and so on, whilst maintaining as much respect as I can for the judiciary, the police, and whomever else that I may discuss on these channels or even criticize at times. I do it respectfully, and I do it within the confines that I need to draw to comply with professional obligations and so on. And of course, the laws as they stand, unironically as that might be. Now, my views on these, many people have sought. I've been on the live chat on Dan Wootton's interview. Many of you have said hello to me there. Thank you all so much for that. It's nice to have this chat on other videos as well as my own. And my views on this are as follows. I think however much a system is designed to be fair overall, there are always going to be ways that it works that result in an unfair situation, an unfair process, unfair procedures, unfair happenstances, circumstances, and ultimately what many people will feel, as they do in this case with Lucy Connelly, unfair sentences. Now, I make my feelings clear when I talk of the judges, for example, when applying the sentencing guidelines, for example, where they apply a particular sentence, I say don't criticize the judges necessarily. They're following the guidelines, because if they go outside of those guidelines, then it's appealable anyway. And then I go on to say don't criticize the barristers, for example, those prosecuting the cases, because they are doing the job. Now, every case must be prosecuted and defended, hopefully equally adequately, professionally, fearlessly, and fiercely within the rules, so that it is as fair a system as it can be. Because if one side or another were swayed politically or in any other kind of way that they shouldn't be swayed, then we have a corrupt system. So we hope that they are fought and defended equally, which is why we have rules to maintain independence, honesty, integrity, etc. So the barristers doing the job will fight on behalf of the Crown if they are prosecuting. If they've decided to prosecute a case, they will prosecute it within the rules and within the evidence as much as they can. And it should be equally defended. Not the case here. The opportunity was not afforded to Lucy Connelly because she pleaded guilty. Why? Because she was inherently, quoting her here, she said her solicitor said, well, obviously you will have to plead guilty. And now that I come now to my criticism of the legislation. I think the law and the legislation as it is currently drafted has failed her on this occasion. I don't necessarily blame the the solicitor here, without looking at absolutely everything that they had in front of them, I can't possibly give you a definitive view on what was said and the advice that was given. That would be wrong to do so. I will say I don't necessarily criticize the solicitor because, excuse me, I'm not the camera, but because I believe that the law has been drafted in such a way that it will catch people in a way that probably wasn't really intended, or at least in light of free speech, in light of the freedoms that we supposedly enjoy in this country. Keir Starmer is happily telling people on a world stage, in the Oval Office no less, that we have free speech in the UK, we have the right to the freedom of expression, we've had it for a long time, he's proud of it, we'll fight for it, etc. That is not the case when this law applies in this way, when it leads the solicitor. Now, there's been a lot of, more than not criticize the solicitor necessarily, I will probably defend the solicitor here a little bit. Even, and this is preemptively, but even without having seen all the papers and without all the details, without all the tweets, without hearing the interviews, the interrogations, all that sort of stuff, to this degree, I will defend the solicitor and say the solicitor would have been looking at the legislation and how it is drafted. Now, there are two ways that this law applies. Firstly, the intent. She was charged with she was charged with publishing material stirring up racial hatred. Now, either this offence can apply either if there's the intent to stir up racial hatred, or the less serious one, in all the circumstances, then it is likely that that will be stirred up. Now, according to what I've learned, the CPS were going for the intentional aspect of this. Now, that may have been because that's just their job, to go for the more serious one that they think they'll get. There may have been political pressures. I don't know, without speaking to anyone at the CPS that confirms or denies that was the case. Officially, it shouldn't really be the case. We don't know, really. What we do know is that Keir Starmer certainly put out this political message, and at least we have subconscious bias, which is where if you grow up in a community where the whole community thinks a certain way, you might not actively think in that way. But if the whole community thinks in that way, you might have subconscious bias. You might be unconsciously biased or prejudiced towards a certain person, certain group, and so on. And that may apply without you knowing it. So that may well have applied in this situation. There may well have been an unconscious bias applied in this case throughout, leading to her guilty plea. And of course, then the judge started at the starting point as though she'd pleaded guilty and then take off the credit, etc. Now, that is normal, again, following the guidelines. But I believe that the law, as it is drafted, this statutory offence of stirring up or publishing material that is likely to stir up racial hatred, I think that has failed her here. Now, obviously, I hope it's obvious, I don't agree with anybody stirring up racial hatred. Of all people, my wife is Chinese, and friends of mine and colleagues of mine and people that I train with are from all sorts of different places. And obviously, I don't approve of that. But at the same time, I also have strong views about what we should be prosecuting as a criminal offence, what we should be sending people to prison for, or taking money off them by way of fines for, as against the freedoms that we should enjoy. Because think of taking money off you, taking tax off you is taking money off you. So in some ways, increasing your taxes, adding new taxes, is a bit like a punishment. If you send a child to a private school and they've recently added 20% on those fees, we're talking, if you've got 3 children, close to £10,000 a year. That feels like a punishment. So where do we draw these lines? Because if we have the freedoms, if Keir Starmer proclaims that we have freedom of speech in this country and is proud of it and defend it and so on, then really at what point should this be criminalized? Now, I think even Lucy Connelly agrees that she shouldn't have posted that tweet. She said if she regretted it, it was silly, etc. And a lot of other people have done similar things. But at the same time, even Keir Starmer said, if you post something and then delete it very quickly, prosecutions shouldn't necessarily follow. Although they may not apply, that caveat may not apply to the offence of stirring up racial hatred. But we still come back to, at what point should we criminalise this? Because in my profession, in my line of work, I've seen some very, very strange messages, letters, publications, direct threats to life. I've been involved in cases of international kidnapping. I've been involved in cases of honour killings or threats of honour killings where someone has ended up in hospital beaten to within an inch of her life by her own family. All sorts of things. And these are the really heinous things that we really need to address and criminalise. Now, you might work that back and then say, well, the legislation is designed to prevent that. The legislation is worded in such a way to take a hard line to prevent people from stirring this up and making this happen and making it, encouraging other people to do that. But at the same time, then, well, let's look at the tweets. Now, taking her tweet on the face of it, I don't agree with the contents of the tweet. It's like that saying goes, I disagree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. The tweet in itself, I don't agree with. But for the fact that it said, for all I care, she said, do this thing. Now, to me, that shouldn't have been prosecuted. I would agree that it's wrong. Quite clearly, I would agree that it's wrong. And I wouldn't encourage anyone to post that. I wouldn't encourage anyone to post anything that is... race and religion is the one area that I do draw the line, save for genuine criticism. If someone is making a genuine criticism, that is completely aside and apart from stirring up hatred. Stirring up hatred is encouraging other people to hate someone because of their religion. Clearly, that is wrong. Now, if someone is just angry and posting out of anger, and people should take that as the transient, natured, angry tweet that it is. People have called me all sorts of things. People have said all sorts of weird things to me. They've said things like, I'm a 7th degree black belt. I'll pull my belt down so you can see it. It hangs up here. I proudly hang it up here. But somebody said in the comments once, said, does a 7th degree stop a bullet? They said, in a message to me. Do I report that to the police as a direct threat to life? No, I didn't. I don't think that was a direct threat to life. It was a horrible thing to say. They shouldn't have said it, and it was arguably that the police could have looked into that and could have approached somebody that sent it as some sort of threat to life. But I take that as the transient nature as it is. I can't, on the one hand, I can't advocate free speech and at the same time report every single thing. There will be lines, and I have reported one or two things in the past, quite horrific things. But where do we draw this line? Now, as I said, I think the law here has failed Lucy Connelly in the way that it is drafted. What is the solution? We need to redraft the law. And I think the real petition here is not that there's several petitions going on at the moment. There's petitions to kick asylum seekers out of hotels. Again, nothing at all to do with race or religion. It's to do with the fact that people are angry that they're being given this for nothing when other people work for it very hard. So, there's a difference there. And I've said in many videos, I know refugees. I have known refugees over many, many years. And they are the nicest people I've ever met. They work hard, they have integrated, and they are absolutely an asset to society. But there's yet another petition for a general election and so on. And there's lots of different petitions. I think there should be a petition to change the law. And that might well have real legs. I think if there was a petition to say this law needs to be changed, it needs to be absolutely strict, that there was a direct call for people to hate another race or religion, not just stirring up. I think it's too vague, it's too fluffy. I think posting something that in all the circumstances it is likely that hatred will be stirred up with no intent required, a vague description that could really apply to anything. If you were to say, I don't like this religion, that religion, or I don't like their practice, this practice, you could easily argue in many of those cases that by posting that without any intent, in all the circumstances, it is likely that hatred will be stirred up. You could argue that about tens of thousands of posts. I think it's too wide, too fluffy, too vague, and that is not what we should expect of criminal law. Criminal law should be absolutely direct and clear. So I think it should be either repealed or replaced, reworded with a different offence, which is absolutely strict on what it does. And as it happens, we do have laws for things like that. We call them hate speech. So it is a direct sort of preach to people that they should hate someone else. And so we've got hate preachers in prison. Some of the most notorious ones are in Belmarsh. And so we have hate preachers in prison because we already have laws like that. This is obviously a lesser offence than those things. So perhaps it could be a lesser version of one of those offences, but not as fluffy as it is now. I think this has absolutely failed Lucy Connelly and it should be replaced. Those are my views. I think the system has failed her as well. I think the fact that she was in such fear of being remanded, because she was remanded into custody, she was likely told, or at least believed, that she was going to be remanded into custody for a long time, and therefore wanted to believe that if she did plead guilty, as she did say in interviews, she believed that she would get a much lower sentence. And obviously that didn't happen. It was a lengthy sentence, because if you plead guilty to that offence there is a lengthy sentence attached to it, if indeed you either plead guilty or you were found guilty. Now, that's where I might question the advice a little bit. I'm not going to comment on it because I haven't seen it, obviously. As I said, I'm not going to be quick to criticise the lawyers here. And as I understand it, my learned friend Alan Robertshaw did a video on this as well regarding the plea, written basis of plea. The CPS were not going to agree a written basis that she didn't intend to stir up racial hatred. They were going for intent. They wanted full intent or nothing. So it really brought it back to a binary choice: plead guilty or plead not guilty. But pleading not guilty, she expected to be remanded into prison for a very long time. And as she said then, and as I agree, I think the system would have had no absolute need, no incentive to rush her through the system if she's already remanded into custody, because then she's held on remand. And as Keir Starmer said, being held on remand. I think he really does need to answer for this, because he really absolutely categorically should not have said that people would be held on remand. Now, even being the lawyer here, I can think of a defense to that, and he said it as a general statement, a general warning, because some people would be held on remand, etc. But the way he said it, we all know how he said it. The way he said it was everybody would believe that they would be held on remand. So I don't think it would be, I mean, it'd be a defense, but it wouldn't be a very good one to say that some people would be held on remand. Therefore, people will be held on remand is an accurate statement. But I don't buy that. I think people genuinely believe that they would be held on remand for any offence, for anything to do with the civil unrest following Southport. That's what I believe. And I believe Lucy Connolly believed that she would be held on remand, and that's ultimately why she pleaded guilty, because she wanted a lower sentence to get out quickly, and as she put it, to get home as quickly as possible. So I think the system has failed here, and I think the system needs more safeguards, and it needs some independent checks or something to ensure that this is being handled fairly. But with a bloated system of 70 or 80,000 cases in the backlog to the Crown Court, that is why it might have taken a year or two before she even got to the Crown Court at the best of times, because there are people waiting for several years. Someone I met just not a few days ago now had been hit in the face with a glass, and it had destroyed pretty much the whole of the side of his face. He'd had it repaired, but there was still scarring there, and has been waiting now better part of 3 years for the case, for the alleged perpetrator to be taken to Crown Court over it. 3 years, still waiting to go to trial over it. So the system is slow. A slow system is an unfair system, in my view. Again, I say all this respectfully, but you're here for my open views, so please do subscribe to the channel. Obviously, it's a bit of a limb to tell you what I really think here, but I'm doing it respectfully, and I think objectively it's justified. A slow system and a delayed system is an unfair system. I've been through it myself. Court cases against me, one to the High Court I told you about in a recent video, took a long time, and it was all over a lot of nothing. But a slow system is an unfair system, and a system that makes you feel oppressed is an unfair system. A system where you've got the Prime Minister saying you will be held on remand makes it an unfair system, in my view. And then when you get a law, which is the focus of my video here, when you get a law which is so softly and fluffily worded that it could apply to so many different comments that really have no place in court. It could apply to so many of those comments. I think the law is wrong. It's worded badly. And so that's what I think needs to change. So if we need a petition, if someone wants to set one up, I will sign it and I will promote it. The law in this area needs to change. And as we often name new laws or changes in law over a person, maybe this could be Connolly's law, and we get this law changed. So with that, leave me your thoughts and comments in the box below. Please do like the video and subscribe. That helps this channel grow. I would love for this channel to get to 100,000 subscribers. So I will put it proudly next to these two up here, and I will display them proudly as our platform here for free speech, fighting for your freedom here. And I will do that every step. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.